This seller client almost lost $17,000 because of a bad appraisal. Here's how we stopped that from happening. This all starts a few years ago. I was representing the seller. She was selling a condo in the Bucktown Wicker Park area of Chicago. The purchase price for the property was $327,000, and the buyer was using financing for the purchase. Buyer's appraiser goes out, comes back with an appraisal of $310,000. Now, pertinent to this story, believe it or not, is that I had another transaction at the same time where I was representing the buyer in the same building for a very similar unit. And that unit just happened to be under contract at a fairly substantially higher price. Now, this appraisal had me nervous for, well, both clients, because I had one client who was possibly going to be out $17,000 because of this appraisal, and another client who maybe wasn't even going to be able to purchase their property because of that appraisal as well. Now, when a property appraises lower than the purchase price, it doesn't necessarily mean that the buyer is not going to qualify for a loan. What it means instead is that it changes the amount that they can borrow. The amount you borrow is based on the percentage of the purchase price, but once the appraisal comes in, that's the purchase price as far as the lender is concerned. In order to close on the loan, you have to bring more money in. Typically in these situations, the buyer is going to ask for a price reduction, and that is what this buyer did. They asked for the price to be reduced to $310,000. Now you might say, well, that's an easy choice. I'm not going to get rid of $17,000 of equity just because some appraiser's got some kooky idea of what the property's worth. However, in most instances, the seller is going to be in a position where they probably already have their plans made for the next part of their lives. And in this case, the client was moving to Florida. They had a lease signed. They were ready to go. So this really was a choice of whether to stay the course with their plans and give up $17,000 or cancel all those plans, cancel the lease they had signed, and put their house back on the market because they didn't want to lose out on all that equity. Now, as my client was trying to make the decision of whether to stick $17,000 in a paper bag and light it on fire, something interesting happened. The appraisal came back from my buyer client, and it came back at full price at the much higher amount. Now, that only confirmed what I had thought about the first appraisal, which is that it was not very well done. I told my client what their options were, and I said, look, why don't we let the buyer figure out how they're going to borrow the money in order to buy this property? It doesn't have to be you making a decision of whether to lose out on $17,000 or not. Of course, that decision carried some risks, and she understood that, and she decided to go ahead and take those risks. And we told the buyer, look, you want to buy the property? Find another way to finance it. And that's what they did. They went to another lender who got their own appraisal, and lo and behold, the property appraised out at the purchase price. We closed maybe a week later than we would have if the original lender had a competent appraiser. But sometimes you just have to understand where things are at in the market and understand that some risks are worth taking. And in this case, this one was because my client didn't have to lose out on that 17 grand. And on top of that, we made the buyer pay the better part of about a $5,000 special assessment. That's a whole nother story. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear it.